Good morning. Welcome to the Skeptic Track DragonCon 2023. We made it. It's Monday. Oh my goodness. I know y'all feel like you woke up in a bathtub of ice this morning, right? Right. Anyway, all right. So thank you so much for joining us so early on Monday. We are delighted to have Jeff Hubbs back with us. He spoke with us last year about the moon landing hoax, and it was so great. We wanted to come back. He is a consultant for Georgia Institute of Technology, locally known as Georgia Tech. So thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm very grateful to be here, and I hope I can make it worth your getting up so early this morning. So let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Did we land on the moon, guys? Yes, of course we did. As Freddie Mercury might have said, "Oh, darling, don't be silly." And yet, something on the order of, depending on which poll you look at, between 6 and 20% of Americans seem to believe that we did not land on the moon. So this, over the years, this has turned into a premise that there was a hoax to fake moon landings. Let me try to lay out what the basic assertions of the hoax premise is. First, by 1969, crewed lunar landings were not feasible. To give the appearance of winning the space race with the Soviet Union, landings and moonwalks were instead faked. All the movies and photos of astronauts supposedly on the lunar surface were actually produced in a specially constructed studio. Interestingly, a great number of books have been published, mass market books were published about this hoax claim that we never made it to the moon. There were supposedly whistleblowers and all that, and that's not what happened. What did we really do? We had 17 uncrewed and 12 crewed Apollo flights. Now, when I was going back through these slides a few days ago, I was 17. Was that the number I meant? Yes, there were actually 17 uncrewed Apollo flights and 12 crewed ones up to, including Apollo 17 and the Apollo Soyuz test project. Of all those crewed flights, 2 were Earth orbit, 1 was lunar orbit, 1 moon landing rehearsal with an intentional abort, 6 landings, 1 mission abort, that'd be Apollo 13, and 1 Earth orbit rendezvous, which is Apollo Soyuz. So when I first did this talk back in 2013, I was doing it over in Skeptrack, and I had lots of spacey, techie things to talk about, and I'll get to a couple of those. But over here in Skeptics we care about different things. So what I'm trying to use this moon landing hoax business as kind of a illustration of has to do with the science of epistemology. Epistemology is kind of a branch of the liberal arts, alongside with philosophy. You could consider it part of philosophy. And epistemology is the science of knowledge. In other words, how do we know what we know? What are the limits of knowledge? So moon landing hoax theories provide us with an opportunity to explore epistemological concepts. So what's going on under the hood of this moon landing hoax theory? What is knowledge? What does it mean to know something? Well, knowledge starts with simple belief. Believe something is true. Now, let me give you something illustrative as to why that might not be enough. Suppose I believe my birthday is September 4th. Says so on my birth certificate. My parents always told me that was my birthday. But suppose that they hit the wrong key on the typewriter when I was born, and my parents were so overwhelmed with joy at my arrival that they lost track and I was actually born on September 3rd. Then I had this belief that I was born on September 4th, but my belief is not true. I do not know my birthday was September 4th. So I need something else. I need truth. I'm going to give you an example why truth may not be enough. Suppose I believe I have a fatal illness. Suppose I think I'm going to die from this illness. No doctor has examined me and told me I have a fatal illness. But because I'm a hypochondriac, I believe I have one. Now, if it turns out that I really do have a fatal illness, my belief is correct, but only because of bad luck, really. That doesn't mean that I know I have a fatal illness. So to actually know, I would need something else. Justification. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato, I'm going to wrap my slide back a little bit, contended that we need to connect truth to belief somehow. So if in my previous example, if a doctor has examined me, he's performed tests, tells me I have a fatal disease, then I know I have one, and my belief does not depend on luck or happenstance to be true. Or does it? So I've got a dot with a question mark there on the end of the list. This represents the potential for shading just what justification means. Let me give you an example. Suppose I'm driving down a highway, a country road. There are farms to either side, beautiful farms. And these farms appear to have barns associated with them. Now let's suppose that of all these farms, only one of the barns is real. All of the other ones are just painted facades. As I drive, I notice the barn that happens to be the real one and say, that's a barn. I believe I've seen a barn, and that is the truth, but it's only luck that what I saw was a barn. I did not know. That's something called a Gettier case. Edmund Gettier was a professor at University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Now, some would counter that by saying by saying life experience and common sense makes it highly unlikely that the rest of the barns are false. So, with all this in mind, the moon landing hoax claim is an assertion that our belief that we landed on the moon is not truth, and our justification for believing it is the truth is invalid because there has been a conspiracy to falsify information. So, going back to the assertions of the hoax claim, moon landings didn't occur. Something else occurred instead of that. They both have the equivalent appearance, or they would, except for our clever hoax believers. So why would a person put out the claim that we didn't really land on the moon? What are the motivations for creating and spreading these theories? One is simply distrust of authority and government. A blind faith in government is never good, even in a democracy. A democracy has as a feature transparency. It invites investigation as well as petition and dissent. It's also incumbent on a democratic government to earn trust and correct breaches of trust. But distrust maintained for its own sake as a core position is corrosive to civic life, so it's better to protect institutions whose stock and trade is true, reliable information. Second, something I call smartest guy in the room syndrome. You're in a bar, okay? People are just shooting the breeze about whatever. And one guy decides to act like he's the smartest guy in the room. We never landed on the moon. We never did it. Well, this guy has found a magic answer. Some people realize that the world is a complex place, a big place, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed. There's so much knowledge to absorb. There's so much understanding that takes time and effort to absorb that some people would rather just have a magic answer. So the claim that the moon landings were faked is that magic answer. It explains everything. It feels good without having but it doesn't have a logical underpinning. Someone who thinks they have it all figured out feels empowered and plugged in instead of small and confused. And that gets attention, although that attention isn't deserved. Then there's deliberate disinformation. Disinformation is when someone spreads information that is false, knowing it is false. Misinformation differs in that misinformation is spreading disinformation with no knowledge of if what's being said is really true or not. Not everyone who claims we didn't land on the moon believes that. People seeking to sow distrust, people trying to mess with you, people trying to mess with everybody, make you doubt the systems of establishing and reinforcing the truth of the world, make you distrust society's institutions. And now with the internet, that disinformation and misinformation can easily reach millions of people. And there's the audacity of reality. If you were born long after the moon landings, and that started back in 1969, it's been, what, a good 50 years since anyone's landed on the moon? It, it seems almost impossibly audacious. It kind of beggars belief that anyone could do such a thing, much less the United States. Especially considering the United States or no other country has done anything like that since or beyond it. Only just now is the United States on a concrete path to return human beings to the moon. Some people are just like that. As Bruce Wayne's butler Alfred says in the film The Dark Knight, some people just want to watch the world burn. And a low commitment, low risk way to do that is to just stir up stuff in some public forum, especially anonymously. Some people even say things as jokes, but it may not be clear to the people reading that they're just jokes. You may make a joking comment about all all this stuff was fake, just to joke around. Well, the people who read that may not realize you're joking. And let me tell you something. You go on YouTube, there are thousands and thousands of authentic films having to do with the moon landings. And you don't have to go a page down the comments to find some comment saying, it's a studio, it's fake, didn't happen. I mean, it's that, the misinformation and disinformation is that easy to see. So, what facilitates the spread of these claims? Well, we can start with the whole freaking internet. Now, remember that if you spread moon hoax information on the internet, that labels you as someone who is easily misled. If that can be, and that could be detected algorithmically. So if somebody has written the code to download comments from YouTube postings, they can sort of develop a compendium of what accounts on YouTube are owned by people who are easily misled. Talk radio, podcasts, television. Changes to the regulations governing radio stations decades ago helped the rise of cheap to produce and often nationally syndicated talk radio programs that don't have to perform journalism to build an audience. I used to listen to a guy years in the late 80s and early 90s, and along with stuff about, serious sounding information about government, he'd have someone on who would talk about the face on Mars or something like that. So, and there's no gatekeeper. There's no the only gatekeeper is are the ratings for the radio show high enough to keep that particular show on the air. Troll farms and other bad actors. There's a fellow who was a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute named Clint Watts, and he told NBC News that these troll farms can produce such a volume of content with hashtags and topics that it distorts what is normal organic conversation. According to an Oxford University study, in the days leading up to the 2016 presidential election, Twitter users in swing states in the US received more fake news than real stories. So step away from the screen Investigate for yourself. A moon landing hoax claims require a conspiracy, a group of people conspiring, agreeing together to falsify information. So just because a theory of a thing is a conspiracy theory does not mean the theory is false. And the other day, when I was on the UFO panel, I mentioned this. I can divide conspiracy theories into two types. There are bad conspiracy theories. Bad conspiracy theories must include many interconnected people and events in seemingly endless layers of conspiracy, spread across a long period of time in order to maintain the conspiracy in perpetuity. So, where are the deathbed confessions? The unravelings, the one discovery that that demonstrates that the whole thing was false. Hundreds of thousands of people worked directly and indirectly on the Apollo program, all over the nation. In fact, that was one of the reasons why it got the program got broad political support, because the senators and representatives from nearly all 50 states got a piece of that money. So that's a bad one. What would be a good conspiracy theory? Good conspiracy theory involves very few people, is over and done. So let's talk a bit. So the moon landing hoax claim requires a conspiracy theory that would be gigantic in scope, and yet there has been no unraveling of. No one has dropped, a folder full of papers over the transom of some major news organization, demonstrating that the Apollo landings were faked. So I'm going to start talking about some specific moon hoax claims. And as we go through this, there's a chant I want to teach you. I'm going to teach you a chant, because when you encounter someone who doesn't believe we landed on the moon, it will be helpful for you to remember this chant. Chant with me, everyone. The moon is not the earth. The moon is not the earth. The moon is not the earth. Thank you. Okay, now you'll remember that forever. One of the claims has to do with computers. The claim goes something like, we can't land on the moon today with the computers we have now. How could they have done it then? This reasoning relies on a fallacy, and if this fallacy has a name, I don't know what it is. But the fallacy goes something like, because you would do a thing a certain way today means that thing was impossible before you could do it that way. Let me show you what that has to do with this particular situation. The Apollo guidance computer was a masterful, beyond cutting edge piece of electronic complexity and miniaturization. It was designed and built by the MIT Instrumentation Laboratory. The Saturn V, the Saturn V rocket stack had two of them. One was in the command module, one was in the lunar module. The lunar module also had another computer called the abort guidance system, which is specifically used to be engaged if the crew of the lunar module had to perform an abort. There was long before those computers became important. The entire Saturn V stack was guided off the pad by the Launch Vehicle Digital Computer, LVDC. It was built by IBM, and it was located in the instrument unit atop the Saturn V third stage. I think you can see it there in that diagram. There was also a flight control computer that was also in the instrument unit. That was an analog computer. It was transistors, resistors, capacitors, and so forth. And it was analog because that was the computer that actually gimbaled the Saturn V's engines. Digital computers were not yet fast enough to make the adjustments necessary, but analog computers, by dint of their very nature, are very fast. This is this is a photo of what the Apollo guidance computer looked like. They're in a great sense of scale, but those black buttons on that panel. It's called the display keyboard, or DISKY for short. Those buttons are small, big enough to be able to punch them with spacesuit gloved hands. So that unit there is probably about this long, this wide, about that deep. I forget how much it weighed, but that that case there is made of a very lightweight alloy, and as you can tell, they routed out places to make it lighter still. If you that assembly opens up like a clamshell, and that's what one half of it looks like. Those are individual circuit cards that are stuck into slots. Now there is there's an account on YouTube called Curious Mark, one word with Mark with a C on the end. He and some other colleagues of his got one of these running its original code. Um, this is what the underside of one of those trays looks like. People meticulously, with wire wrap tools, strung little pieces of wire amongst pins to connect those cards, to make the interconnections between those cards. On those cards, some of the first integrated circuits. But these were extremely, extremely cutting edge things that you could not yet really buy in quantity yet, in great quantity, although that changed very quickly. This particular integrated circuit was made by Philco, same company that made radios. I think they made the car radios for Ford cars. I think they also made home radio sets, and this one was probably made under license to Fairchild. NASA's Apollo program was the largest single consumer of integrated circuits between 1961 and 1965. For memory, for random access memory, and also for how the thing's program was stored. It used ferrite core technology, where you store bit values by putting a magnetic field on tiny iron loops, and you string them together with little tiny wires. The software for the computer was coded into the weave of those wires, and they took as much as 6 weeks to fabricate. So you have to get your bugs fixed before before the nice ladies sat down and knitted one of these things together. That's a diagram of how the Apollo guidance computer fit in with all the other spacecraft systems. There's an inertial sensor that was in the lunar module and in the command module that told the computer where it was pointed, how much it had accelerated. Now, to give you an idea of how possible this was in the mid 1960s, back in the 1950s, the MIT Instrumentation Laboratory had also developed the guidance system for the submarine-launched Polaris missile. Now, it was not a stored program computer, it was more of a difference analyzer that guided the spacecraft by comparing what it knew about its location and acceleration to a stored trajectory. So this stuff was and it was digital. It wasn't analog. These people knew what they were doing. So that's what I mean. You don't need modern technology to land on the moon. 1960s technology was plenty adequate. So that's computers. Another claim has to do with photography, supposedly made in this studio. There actually are movie studios, that are specifically designed to be able to fake moon, um, fake lunar footage. It's actually very difficult to do. But there are many claims about that, uh, and here's one of the theories that is supposed to indicate that this was fake. What you see there in that picture, that is Buzz Aldrin beginning to descend the ladder off the Apollo 11 lunar module. He is being photographed by a Hasselblad camera mounted on the chest of the suit of Neil Armstrong. Now, I'm going to zoom in on that boot. What's shiny? What's making what's making that bright reflection off the surface of that boot? Studio lighting. No, not it's not the sun. Where's the which direction's the sun in that shot? Away. The lunar landings were all done in lunar morning with the sun behind them. That was for one to keep the sun out of their eyes, and also it maximized the relief of the terrain for them to to help them know where they were, recognize landmarks, and get a visual sense of where they were going. You know, the weird thing about trying to land on the moon is it's self-similar. If you're 100 feet above it, it doesn't look that different from being 1,000 feet or 10,000 feet above it. So these astronauts were very dependent on their knowledge, their foreknowledge of the terrain, the guidance system, and the radar altimeter on the lunar module to know how high they were. And they didn't. And the last assurance they had about where they were going to land is seeing the shadow on the ground approach underneath them. So anyway, that's where the sun is in this shot. It's behind the limb. So what about this light? Studio lighting? Okay. That blue object there actually is not the boot, it's an overshoe. It's made of silicone. It is kind of shiny because they didn't bother, scrubbing the release agent from the mold off of it. But um, if you look at the entire picture, where is Armstrong standing? He's standing in the sun. What color is the moon? A lot of people think it's white because it looks so bright at night. Really, it's a medium dark gray, about like weathered asphalt. What is the brightest object on the moon on July 20th, 1969, at this moment when this picture was taken? Neil Armstrong. He is the light. It is he that is reflecting off of the moon. Um, Now, the suits were covered in a material called beta cloth. It's a Teflon coated woven silica fiber. It is a brilliant white. It needed to be to help maintain thermal control of the suit. Lunar soil reflectivity is about 13%. Think if it were like 80 or 90%, what it would look like at night in a full moon. Okay, so I actually cribbed this picture from some moon hoax something. And the basic idea is this. In the upper left is a picture of lunar terrain with some mountains in the background. Okay. On the right, on the upper right, well, wow, that looks like the same background, but there's the lunar module sitting there this time. Would they move the background to another set? What is this? And then they actually match the two pictures together. The backgrounds match exactly between when the lunar module is there and when it's not. So obviously this picture is faked. Well, there's something. What? Chant for me. Chant. Moon is not the Earth. The moon is not the Earth. Thank you. I actually found one of the pictures that was taken from that location. I got this from NASA. They're taking this picture um, from the Apollo Lunar Experiment. ALSEP is it? Something package. I've forgotten the what it stands for. That's where they're standing to take this picture, and they're aimed toward the southeast, toward the lunar module. Now, those peaks off in the distance, that's called the Mons Hadley Delta. Those mountains are about 2.25 miles high, like almost 12,000 feet, okay, above the surrounding plains. Here's a full version of the other photo. It doesn't show the limb. It was taken off to one side of where the other one was taken, which is why the foreground is different. Well, here's a contemporary map of the landing site. I mean, this comes from back then in the early 70s when Apollo 15 was done. So that X is where the lunar module was, and the EVA-2 excursion that they made was the one to the lower right. They got as far as the foot the very foot of Mons Hadley Delta. Here's another photo that's at an oblique that's taken from orbit from as an oblique angle. Um, I don't think you can see my mouse pointer. See that sharp bend um, in that collapsed lava tube called Hadley Rill? That's right at the foot of the mountain, kind of center left. Just above that bend is where Apollo 15 landed. Those pictures were taken shooting up into that plane, off in the direction of those peaks. So the distance from the Alsep to the I'm sorry, let me back up. The peaks of Mons Hadley Delta that you see in these photos, they are about 15 miles away. So the distance from the Alsep to the Lem is nothing compared to the distance from the Alsep to the peaks, which is why the Mons Hadley Delta peaks look the same in both photos. You could walk 100, 200 yards to one side, and it'd still look the same from there. Now, what's the chant? The moon is not the Earth. The moon is not, thank you. Okay. This is the Earth. Here's a mountain range on the Earth. And I chose this picture because you can see it illustrates very clearly something that we use on the Earth subconsciously to judge distance. Haze. Okay? You can see those trees at the bottom appear to be very bright and clear, no haze at all. Over in the center right is another hillside. It looks the contrast is a little less. Is more faded, and it goes like that the farther you go until like center upper right. There's a very distant peak that's very hazy. The moon has no atmosphere. It has no haze. Those mountains look like it's just a few hundred yards away when it's 15 miles. Distance does not um, um, confer haze to give you a visual cue as to how far things are away. Here's another claim. Hoax believers often point out that the photos from the moon have to be fake because although the sky is as black as night, you can't see the stars. And it turns out the astronauts really couldn't see them either. It was bright. Um, there's something in photography that people don't remember so much anymore because people are using their phones instead of proper cameras, but it's called the Sunny 16 rule. And what is that? If you don't have a light meter, or your light meter in your camera is broken, or you have a really old camera that's completely manual, one of the things you can always safely do is you set the camera's aperture to f16, look at what your film speed is, and set your shutter speed to 1 over that. So what I've done with this camera, I took this picture of a convenience store about a mile from my house. And because it was a digital camera, I could just set the film speed arbitrarily. I set to ISO 500. Okay, ISO 500, f16, 1/500th of a second. Snap, that's what that convenience store looks like. Later that night, I took the camera back. Exact same settings. 1/500th of a second, 500 ISO, f16. Took the picture again after I increased the exposure from 1/500th of a second to 1 second. That's 9 stops difference. That gives you some idea of just how cool the human eye is, that it can operate at both scales. I'm not sure if there are any digital cameras that have 9 stops or better of range. So so it's just knowing a thing or two about how cameras work makes that particular hoax claim seem silly. So I'm gonna end with this story, and then I'm going to take questions. When Apollo 11 was attempting to land, it became a very fraught situation very quickly. Things were pretty much going fine, except during the descent, guidance officer. Guidance officer is one of the positions in mission control. And for the Apollo 11 landing, the man in the chair was named Steve Bales. And at this point in time, Bales was sweating a navigation error that was approaching an abort limit. If I remember correctly, I think the LEM had gone was overshooting. It was almost to the point where by mission plan, the astronauts were going to be told to abort. Bales himself had abort authority. He could call one on his own. 6 minutes from landing, the LEM's Apollo guidance computer threw a program alarm. On the voice recording, you hear Aldrin call down 1202, 1202, program alarm. Armstrong, who was busy keeping track of where they were, asked for an explanation. It happened that Bales knew what it was. It was an obscure error message, execution overflow. Now, the AGC was a multitasking computer. It was doing more than one thing essentially at once. What it was actually doing is doing a bunch of different things in rapid succession in a cycle. The tasks had priorities. There were so many tasks going by, some of which were timing critical, that the computer was beginning to drop lower priority tasks. Now, every mission control position has a back room. In other words, it's a place where there are other engineers there, have the same consoles and even more information than the person sitting in the seat in mission control has. Different controllers are in the seat at different times. So when at that point, the urgency for perhaps having to do an abort just got way higher. So Bales called to his back room. He called to Jack Garman, an engineer named Jack Garman. Garman and Bales agreed if the alarms were intermittent, they were still go. They told Flight Director Gene Kranz and Capcom Charlie Duke that they were still go. And both of them trusted Bales to know what he was talking about, otherwise he would not have been in the chair. 2 minutes later, 1201 alarm. Bales called back, same type, go. There were 3 more alarms. 2 minutes later, the LEM had landed. It turns out that in the procedures for landing, the rendezvous radar, which was used to locate the command module after they departed the moon, was on and was still sending data to the computer. They figured if they had to abort, enabling that radar was one less thing they'd have to think about. So they left it on. Well, the problem was the radar was going, I don't see anything, I don't see anything, I don't see anything, I don't see anything. So the computer kept processing and ignoring those messages. That's Jack Garman there. Steve Bales was 26 years old. Jack Garman was 24. So, we were able to land on the moon, not because the government had basically bottomless pockets for the project, although, okay, they did. They weren't able to land on the moon because we had an excellent public education system that had been cranking out master's and PhD level engineers every year. Well, okay, we did have that, but that's not why we were able to do that. We had boundless public support, especially due to Cold War tensions, wanting to beat the Soviet Union to the moon. That wasn't, that was true too. That wasn't how we were able to land on the moon. We were able to land on the moon because we were badasses. That's right, badasses. So the people who claim we didn't land on the moon have failed to account for that one thing. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much. So,
Thank you.
I actually have, if you're my friend, then you have privileges to ask questions. So we actually have a live stream that we're doing, and my friend, who is a university level planetary science professor, is asking me, what is okay? So we know this stuff at least to some extent. What is a good way to reach out and actually address these issues? Like about, I assume he means about educating the people, or not even education, but persuading the people that their knowledge, I guess, is limited. I think that's what he's kind of getting at, and that they don't have the understanding that you just explained.
Um, One way to do it is, I mean, it's kind of ordinarily you don't have opportunities to drop this into casual conversation. You just talk about things we did, but also anything you can do to simply support the education system. Remember I was saying before about institutions that whose stock and trade is reliable and true information? Pick an institution that you care about and defend it. It could be a library, it could be a school, it could be a court, it could be a law, it could be a a radio news department. These are all things that having reinforced systems, even for things that have nothing to do with moon landing hoax stuff, but just anything that you can do to reinforce truth and knowledge would be a step in the right direction.
Well, I have worked with, I see you out there and we're going to do your question. I have worked with another emergency physician who one would argue is very highly educated. She did not believe that we landed on the moon. And she's former military as well. So it is, it's frustrating when you have that level of disbelief in something that so clearly happened.
There's a Rush song for everything, and and one of the last songs they did was "Wish Them Well."
You got to do something. Okay, so I see we have a question.
Thank you for the talk. It's very
very
interesting,
welcome.
and I enjoyed it. My question is kind of similar to the question submitted online. I have a friend of a friend who believes in all these conspiracy theories. He believes in chemtrails. He thinks the government put a tracking device in the COVID vaccine. And our mutual friend has tried to reason with him, and God bless him, he's a very nice guy. I just don't know if he's the brightest crayon in the box. You know what I'm saying? Is there, is there anything that can be said to reach these people, or are some people just beyond hope?
Well, aside from just wishing them well, I think if someone is really hardcore, like what you're describing, um, you know, there really isn't anything you can say or do. No, I mean you can attempt progressively more intense truth bombs. Okay, I mean even going down to our stuff is still up there. Someone is going to find out someday. And another thing, something I didn't mention. Um, our spacecraft telecommunications were detectable from the ground everywhere on Earth. If there were not a spaceship in translunar space transmitting signals back to Earth, every other country, if that was not really happening, every other country on Earth would have realized it. But you can just what's called reductio ad absurdum. You take what they're saying as true, and then you follow that logic until you hit something that's so absurd that a reasonable person would be convinced otherwise.
And the key phrase here is reasonable person. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Next.
Sort of related to that, I've always felt, and like as you mentioned,
don't touch the mic. Don't touch the mic.
Sorry, it was falling down.
No, it's coming to.
Oh, it's adjusting. Sorry.
Yeah.
I always felt that like you just mentioned that everyone could hear. So like the best argument was that Russia would have called bullshit if we said we had gone to the moon and hadn't. But is trying to argue with conspiracy theorists from a conspiracy angle effective, or would that be just playing into their delusions? Or
Your time is better spent playing on Team Truth.
Okay.
Ultimately, your time and your mental energy would be better spent talking with other people about how cool we were, what badasses we were, and some of the amazing things that we did. But just off the top of my head, the F1 engine, there are 5 of them on the first stage of the Saturn V. They had a turbo pump. They were turbo pump operated. They were driven by burning fuel and liquid oxygen. So that end of the turbine is like 2,500, 3,000 degrees. Down the shaft from that is an impeller that was pushing kerosene, it was effectively kerosene, at roughly ambient temperature. Down from that was another impeller that was pushing liquid oxygen at minus 200 whatever degrees. And all these 3 temperatures are on the same shaft. We were badasses. Okay? That's the kind of stuff. I mean, you know a friend that likes cars. He's like, I may need a new radiator for this thing. Hey, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something about heat transfer in an engine. I mean, things like that. That's more fun and cool. What's the thing about wrestling with a pig? You both get muddy, and the pig enjoys it. Something like that. That's the thing. The conspiracy theorist wants to be the smartest person in the room. They want to be aha. Okay, that's what they want. Don't give them the satisfaction. Let them be alone in this. Let them feel isolated in their conspiracy beliefs.
All right, thank you.
Okay, you just blew my mind just then. That was something I never even thought of. That's amazing. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yep. Question.
Okay. No, I'm going to break the rule. Shameless plug. You can see a lot of these artifacts in the Davidson Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama.
Yes, you can.
Which is adjacent to Space Camp. So send your kids to Space Camp. Go visit the Davidson Center, and you can see all of this, including a complete Saturn V hanging in the building. And it's co-sponsored by the Smithsonian, and I have had people from DC that came to see it that said this is better than the Smithsonian exhibit. And there's films and an IMAX theater and everything.
Do you know if they have an F1 engine sitting out?
Yes.
Okay, they do.
Multiple ones, and there's ones if you take the Marshall Space Center tour and go on Redstone Arsenal, they have them out there too. There's rocket gardens all over the place. Mm-hmm. There are the vertical test stands where they tested those engines. It's amazing. You can spend days just exploring it.
And each of those engines produced 1.5 million pounds of thrust. Wow. Now, and they were working on the F1A that he had even more, but production was canceled.
Yeah. They even have, well, this is near and dear to me because my company got bought by IBM when I was there. And there is the ring that was part of the Saturn booster that was built by IBM, which is a whole bunch of very advanced for the time digital.
Right, that's the instrument unit. Yeah. And along the inside of the instrument unit is the, I can't remember the acronyms, the analog computer, which kind of looks like a big metal cylinder and then there's the digital guidance computer. That's why Apollo 12 was struck by lightning on the way up twice, and all instrumentation and computers and everything in the command module just wigged out. Okay, everything in the instrument unit was fine. It was like, what's your problem? Well, we're flying the Saturn V. The stuff in the instrument unit they were still flying, so they didn't abort. And some guy, I guess he may have ecom, the guy in the ecom position, electrical, environmental, something, realized from a test that if you turn a signal conditioner to auxiliary, it might fix it. So they call it up, flight tell the crew set SCE to aux. And the astronauts are going, where's that? It's down there, and it fixed everything. So yeah, the stuff in the instrument unit, those computers were very rugged.
No, that's
There's one
hardcore.
more thing I think is cool. It's the Space Monkey Graveyard. So Abel and Baker are buried right
Wow.
outside the center, and there's a marker there, and people leave swag and coins and all on
Okay.
there.
Yeah, leave bananas.
Yeah.
They leave bananas on the
Yeah.
graves. Oh, that's amazing. Party at Chuck's place. So, all right, man, that's hardcore Geek Squad, isn't it?
That is, yeah.
Yeah. That's next question.
There was a documentary a number of years ago, In the Shadow of the Moon, that interviewed a bunch of astronauts, and one thing I retained from that film was over the credits, they asked the astronauts themselves about moon hoaxes and the conspiracy theories. And one of the astronauts gave me my favorite succinct response to the moon hoax allegations, which is that even if we faked it the first time, why would we fake it 5 more times?
Exactly. And go to the trouble to make a missile 360 feet tall, lift off of a pad in front, a full view of millions of people, and visibly go over the horizon.
But if you got away with the first time, why keep just risking it?
Yeah, you would have to do so much to fake it. You might as well just go ahead and go to the moon.
Yeah, it just turned out to be easier.
Right.
Yeah.
And as a question though, I was curious. You pointed to the reflection on the boots there as an example. Do you have any good examples of some of the silliest proofs you've ever seen moon hoaxers suggest sincerely, not ones who are acting, out of bad faith, but
I don't know about silly, but one that keeps coming up is we couldn't have survived the radiation belt. They couldn't have handled the space radiation. It would have been impossible. That couldn't have possibly happened. The Van Allen belts would have killed them. Well, the thing is, by that time, we knew all about the Van Allen radiation belts. We had sent unmanned spacecraft through them specifically for the purpose of, well, discovering them for one thing, and then determining how what the radiation flux in the zone around the Earth where charged particles from space and from the sun tend to collect and start wrapping around because they start to get influenced by the Earth's magnetic field. Now, they knew what the risks were, so they didn't stay in the Van Allen radiation belts very long. They didn't go hanging around out there. Just orbit in place and say, let's wait until someone starts, losing their hair or anything. I'm being silly, but they had all kinds of things. Well, they knew, for instance, that radiation could kill them if there had been a coronal mass ejection of the sun that happened to be aimed in a direction that it went to the Earth-Moon system. If that had happened while they were in translunar space, it would have killed them. They would have died. So they knew that risk. They mitigated it. NASA had solar astronomers. They had a board authority. They could have scrubbed the launch. They had plans for changing the mission profile to get them back to Earth sooner. Like don't land, like Apollo 13 did. They had options. But yeah, it was a possibility that they could have been killed. It was a risk. They mitigated it.
thank you very much.
Any question?
One of the most famous things that I see with the conspiracy people theory, and I wanted to know how you would explain it. It's the one with the helmet, and there's the reflection of a so-called microphone reflecting off the helmet. Are you aware of that one? Because they show that one all the time. And how do you explain to them what exactly that is?
Well, I mean, there is a very popular photograph that was taken of Aldrin by Armstrong, just full frontal, with area around him reflected in the gold-covered visor in the front of the helmet. And somebody has actually taken that photograph and decurved it so that you can kind of see what is in the background. And what would this microphone be picking up? They've got helmets on. The premise is just ridiculous. Anyway, next question.
Hi, thank you for the presentation.
You're very welcome.
I think a lot of skeptics tend to sort of end up collecting theories and sort of have pet theories that they enjoy. And like that's part of the whole skeptic idea is just being fascinated by the conspiracy theories to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very interested by your breakdown of what was like a good conspiracy theory versus a bad conspiracy theory. So I was wondering if you had any particular theories, without necessarily endorsing them, that you have sort of held on to as the most interesting or the best conspiracy theories. And this doesn't have to be limited specifically to moon stuff.
There's one I really don't even want to approach because no, because I mean it's not just it's mean spirited, but other than, well, there are, one thing you can always say is the astronauts saw something and they did, but they didn't want to talk about it. They saw a UFO. They saw a mouse running on. They saw some kind of moon mouse running around, but they didn't want to say anything. You know, that's kind of, those are things that hardest to, because you're trying to prove, prove something that it's very hard to get past something like that. So those claims are kind of hard to refute, because how can you say no, they didn't see that? but I calling those favorites is kind of strikes me as goofy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Time for a couple more questions if they're short.
I just wanted to mention that some of those things, when they come up with moon mice or something, I just say, you just made that up. Okay?
Yeah, where
I don't feel like arguing or anything. It's like, you just made that up. And, they can go prove it.
or like, where'd you hear that? That's a good one, because it puts the onus on them. State your justification. Demonstrate that this came from something that's falsifiable, at least on its face, or did it come from any kind of source that's the least bit authoritative, or is it something that could be corroborated by other means, even if it comes down to working out the math of something. We all have the same math.
I'm mean. I usually just don't want to argue. It's like, you just made that up.
Again, your time your time can be spent so much better. Yeah. Gardening, anything.
Anyway, I just wanted to ask, where do you get those cool, nice, sharp, beautiful moon photos that are so much better than the grainy video we all watched in 1969?
Gosh. I mean, I could flippantly say NASA.gov, but no. If you really want to find high quality scans of these images,
okay,
they are available. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you where.
Should I look at a NASA site or a museum site?
I would start with NASA.gov, because one of the things that NASA is in the business of is cataloging, storing, safekeeping everything that happened, every transcript of radio communications, and the radio communication transcripts are fascinating, as are the debriefs after the astronauts landed, where they discuss things. Aldrin, I read one where Aldrin talks about kind of where his head was when it came to actually land, about whether or not to abort. I remember the phrase he used was, "In the simulator, we're spring-loaded to abort, but that day, we're spring-loaded to land." And in other words, they would extend themselves and take a risk that they wouldn't take in the simulator. And it was all on Armstrong's head. It was on his recognizance to do that.
NASA is good at PR, almost as good as they are at spreading their work over as many congressional districts as possible.
Absolutely. That's how you get votes. That's how you get budgets voted for.
Okay, if it's a really, really quick one.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what's the harm in believing in this particular conspiracy theory? There are much more dangerous ones, of course, but like the previous question, I don't want to engage with them. I don't want to waste my time. What's the harm in just letting someone believe this particular one?
Well, the harm in letting someone continue to believe it is simply that there goes a person that'll believe anything. In other words, this is someone whose mental system for consistently determining what is real has broken down. And if it will break down for moon landings, it'll break down for anything. Now, one of the things that totalitarian governments have always counted on is you get rid of the journalists, you you control the libraries, you tell college professors, this happened in Germany in the 30s. Professors were sat down and said, okay, you see this, you're going to be teaching according to this, or you won't be at this university. You won't be in any university in Germany. This is how we got so many German scientists in the United States. Yep. So it's corrosive. It's corrosive to living in a democracy to have too many people running around that'll believe any crap they're told.
And well, plus Buzz Aldrin might punch you in the face.
Oh man! Well, that's if you don't know, there was some guy.
Video of all time.
There was some guy who kept going, tracking down Buzz Aldrin and bothering him. You tried to get him to put his hand on a Bible and swear that he actually landed on the moon. Eventually, Aldrin just punched him.
It's the best video ever.
He was in his 70s.
I know. I love
that.
And
I'm sure a 70-something-year-old Buzz Aldrin could hurt you.
Yeah. Look it up online. Okay. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you.
Love having you here. Yay. Thank you.
I appreciate you all coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Dragon Con Skeptic Track. We'll see you in a little while. Bye.